Dropping a tray of champagne flutes in the middle of a black tie fundraiser usually ended a catering career on the spot. For Maggie Tulloch, it merely meant the most dangerous man in Chicago had finally noticed she existed. She weighed 275 pounds, owned exactly one pair of dress shoes that didn't make her feet scream, and had spent the last 6 years apologizing to people who didn't deserve the courtesy. She was about to spend the next 6 weeks apologizing to a man who would have had her killed for it, if she hadn't, somehow, completely disarmed him first. The Hargrove Hotel on Michigan Avenue was not the kind of place Maggie Tulloch usually worked. She was a Tuesday night Red Lobster girl, the kind of server who remembered every table's drink order and still got stiffed on the tip. But the catering company she'd been picking up shifts with had landed a contract for the Bella Croce Foundation's annual charity gala, and they were short-staffed, and Maggie needed the rent money, and that was the full and complete length of her decision-making process. She had not been warned about the man in the corner. Cillian Voss stood near the floor-to-ceiling windows, overlooking Lake Michigan like he'd paid someone to arrange the skyline behind him. He was 41, broad-shouldered, with silver threading through dark hair at his temples and a jaw sharp enough to use as a letter opener. He wore a charcoal Tom Ford suit that hadn't come off a rack anywhere in this hemisphere. He was the kind of man who made a room organize itself around him without saying a word. The gravity just worked differently in his vicinity. What the fundraiser program listed as philanthropist and real estate developer Cillian Voss was, in more accurate terms, the operating head of the Voss Syndicate, the most disciplined and ruthless criminal organization between the Appalachians and the Rockies. His legitimate holdings in commercial real estate, port logistics, and private equity laundered somewhere north of $400 million a year. The FBI had been trying to build a case on him for the better part of a decade. His lawyers had buried 3 federal investigations without breaking a sweat. The men flanking him, 2 of them, both built like refrigerators in tailored wool, had not touched their champagne. Maggie had not noticed any of this, because Maggie was focused entirely on the silver tray balanced in her left hand, the full rack of flutes balanced on the tray, and the fact that her right heel had just caught the edge of a power cable running under the carpet runner near the service entrance. She went down like a very large, very apologetic redwood. The tray hit the marble floor first. 15 champagne flutes met their end in a spectacular cascade of breaking glass and moët, the sound cutting clean through the string quartet's rendition of something Maggie couldn't identify, but vaguely knew was classical. Every head in the room turned. The 2 refrigerator men reached for their jackets simultaneously before they processed that the threat was a 275-pound woman in a black catering uniform staring up at the ceiling from the floor. Cillian Voss did not reach for anything. He looked down at her. "Oh, for the love of..." Maggie pushed herself up on one hand, her face the precise color of a tomato in direct sunlight. She surveyed the glittering wreckage around her and made immediate eye contact with what appeared to be a very expensive shoe. She followed the shoe upward, and then further upward, and then she arrived at the face. She said, "I am so incredibly sorry. I will absolutely pay for those." "On a catering salary," she added, "so it may take a while. Possibly years. Do you accept installments?" One of the refrigerator men made a sound. It was not quite a word. It was the sound a person makes when they are trying very hard not to laugh and their body is staging a rebellion. Cillian Voss looked at her for a long moment. He had been looked at in the last 20 years with fear, desire, calculation, and the particular flatness of people who were trying very hard to conceal that they were afraid. He had not recently been looked at with the expression currently on this woman's face, which was approximately 70% mortification and 30% defiant refusal to fully collapse. "Get up," he said. His voice was low and even, faintly accented. somewhere mid-Atlantic, the kind of English that had spent time in several countries, before you cut yourself on the glass. Maggie got up. She was careful about it, which took longer than she would have liked, and her knee popped loudly enough that the nearest string quartet violinist visibly flinched. She stood, squared her shoulders inside her slightly too tight uniform jacket, and said, "I'm Maggie Tulloch. I'm with Hargrove Catering. I will have someone clean this up immediately, and I will personally replace every single one of those glasses." Starting, she paused to do quick and visibly painful mental math. "Sometime after my next 3 paychecks." Cillian studied her, the catering uniform, the sensible low bun that was already escaping in wisps around her face. The round softness of her, the freckles across her nose, the way she was maintaining eye contact, despite the fact that her face had not yet returned to its normal color. She was not performing anything. There was no angle here. In 20 years of navigating a world made entirely of angles, this was profoundly, almost aggressively unusual. "Clean it up," he told her, "and bring me a Macallan 18, neat." Maggie blinked. "That's it." His mouth moved. It was not quite a smile. "Don't push it." She didn't push it. She flagged down a colleague for the glass, located the bar, successfully delivered the scotch without incident, and told herself that was the end of it. She was wrong. The Hargrove Hotel had a permanent events coordinator position open. Cillian Voss's assistant, a lean and perpetually unsmiling man named Rafferty, appeared at Maggie's elbow at the end of the evening with a business card. "Mr. Voss," Rafferty explained in the tone of a man who had delivered stranger news and expected it to continue, had noted her organizational instincts during the cleanup operation. The Voss Group hosted 12 major events per year at this venue. The pay was triple what she made catering. Maggie took the card home. She stared at it for 2 days. She needed the money badly enough that the staring didn't last 3. She lasted longer than anyone expected, which was to say she lasted past the first morning. The Voss Group's Chicago office occupied the top 2 floors of a glass tower on Wacker Drive with views of the river and, on clear days, the curve of the lake. It was immaculate in the way of places that had never once experienced a Tuesday with bad coffee. Maggie arrived 12 minutes early, managed to badge through the security turnstile on only the 2nd attempt, and reached the 38th floor without incident, which felt like a victory substantial enough to build a small monument to. Rafferty met her at the elevator. He handed her a tablet, a building access card, a 4-page NDA, and a look that communicated without words that she should not touch anything that wasn't explicitly assigned to her. "Mr. Voss's calendar is here," he said. "His standing preferences are on page 3. He takes his coffee black, no sugar, from the beans in the 2nd cabinet only. He does not take calls before 8 or after 9 unless the caller is on the approved list, which I will send you. He does not tolerate lateness, errors in written communication, or the word utilize." "I'd never," Maggie said solemnly. Rafferty's expression did not change. His previous 3 events coordinators left within a combined total of 11 weeks. Were they pushed, or did they jump? A pause, the faintest, most reluctant twitch of something near Rafferty's mouth. One of each, and one who simply never came back, and we prefer not to discuss it. He turned. "Mr. Voss will review your first event brief at 10. Do not be late." The brief was for a private dinner, 16 guests, 2 weeks out, a floor of the Hargrove reserved. Maggie had the preliminary vendor confirmations, seating arrangement draft, and menu options on Cillian's desk by 9:45. She had also, in the process of accessing his scheduling system, discovered that his standing Tuesday lunch reservation had been booked under the wrong date for the past month, and quietly corrected it before anyone noticed. Cillian reviewed the brief without comment for 4 minutes. Then, the Barretti account. Table 6. Move Barretti to table 3. Maggie looked at her seating chart. Barretti and Engel are both at table 3. They had a public falling out in February. It was in the Tribune. If they're seated together, Move Beretti to table 3, Cillian repeated, and seat Engel at table 6. Oh, right. Sorry. Maggie made the correction. Different solution, same result. Yes. He glanced up. You read the Tribune. I read everything. It's a problem. My phone storage is mostly news apps and pictures of my cat. Something shifted almost imperceptibly in his expression. Not warmth, exactly. More like the adjustment a compass makes when it detects an unfamiliar magnetic field. The Tuesday lunch reservation, he said. It was corrected this morning. It had the wrong date for 4 weeks. You had a standing confirmation email going out every Monday for a Thursday table. He was quiet for a moment. Rafferty didn't catch it. Rafferty has about 17 other things happening at once. I just happened to be in the system. She paused. I can put it back if you'd prefer the chaos. The almost smile again. Dismissed Miss Tulloch. She was not fired. This was, by the accounting of everyone in the office, unprecedented. By the end of the first week, the men in the outer office had begun to develop opinions about Maggie Tulloch. The Voss Group's legitimate staff coexisted with a rotating population of individuals whose job titles were technically in logistics and security, but whose actual function was something else entirely. And these men, large, watchful, professionally unexpressive, had started cataloguing her the way they catalogued everything, as either a risk or not a risk. She was not a risk. She was, they were increasingly forced to conclude, something they had no category for. On Tuesday, she dropped an entire carton of event folders down the stairwell on 14. They exploded across 3 landings. She spent 45 minutes collecting them, reorganizing them, and had them back on the right desks before anyone noticed they were gone, with the single exception of Carver, a 6'4" security detail who had watched the whole thing from the landing and was now having a quiet internal crisis about whether he was allowed to think it was funny. On Wednesday, she walked into what she believed was an empty conference room to check the AV setup and discovered 2 men she didn't recognize in a conversation that stopped the moment she opened the door. She assessed the situation, the tension, the posture, the fact that Cillian was standing between the 2 men with the specific stillness of someone calculating distances, and said, "I'm so sorry, I'll come back to do the mic check," backed out, and pulled the door closed behind her, and did not ask a single question. Later, one of the 2 men left in a car that had arrived with no prior notification. The other one didn't leave at all, in the sense that he was eventually escorted through a service exit by Carver and another man Maggie had never seen before. She didn't mention it. She finished the mic check, sent Cillian the updated AV notes, and went home and watched 3 episodes of a baking show and tried very hard not to think about what she might have stepped into. It was the numbers that changed things, the same way numbers had changed things before. The Hargrove Gala, the event, technically, that had started all of this, had a reconciliation file that landed on Maggie's desk because she was now, apparently, coordinating the post-event wrap-up billing. She wasn't looking for anything. She was just doing what she always did, which was read everything, because that was a problem she'd had since childhood. She found it in the catering invoices. A vendor named Aurelius Hospitality Group was billing for services at 3 separate events. The gala, a private dinner in March, and a corporate lunch she could confirm had gone through a different vendor entirely. The invoices were formatted slightly differently from the others. The amounts were not large enough to be obvious. They totaled, across the 3 events, just under $60,000 billed to the Voss Group with no corresponding service records. Maggie sat with this for a while. Then she pulled every vendor reconciliation going back 14 months and spent a Saturday cross-referencing them with the event logs in the scheduling system. By Sunday evening, she had a spreadsheet that made her stomach hurt. Aurelius Hospitality Group had been billing the Voss Group for phantom catering services at a rate of roughly $8,000 to $12,000 per event for just over a year. Maggie's conservative estimate of the total was $104,000. Her less conservative estimate was $130,000. She did not know who ran Aurelia's hospitality group. She did not especially want to know. She knew with profound certainty that this was not a situation where she could pretend she hadn't seen it, because she had already printed the spreadsheet, and she was not good at pretending in general, and was especially bad at it about numbers. She brought it to Cillian on Monday morning. He was on the phone when she knocked. He looked at her, read something in her expression, and said quietly into the phone, "I'll call you back." He hung up. "Mrs. Tulloch." "I was doing the Hargrove reconciliation," she said. She put the spreadsheet on his desk. "I think someone has been overcharging you. A lot." She paused. "I can walk you through it. I have it color-coded." Cillian looked at the spreadsheet. His expression did not change in any way that would have been legible to most people. Maggie had been watching his face for 6 weeks, and she caught it anyway. The micro-tension along his jaw, the way his eyes moved with a particular cold focus. "Sit down," he said. She walked him through it. He asked 4 questions. All 4 were exactly the right questions. When she finished, he was quiet for long enough that she started to wonder if she had miscalculated something, and was about to be told so. "This took you a weekend," he said finally. "I had nothing else going on. My cat isn't great at conversation. Rafferty has been managing vendor reconciliation for 3 years. Rafferty is excellent at a lot of things. This one slipped through." She hesitated. "I don't know who Aurelius is. I don't want to know. But you should probably know that I know, so you can decide what you want to do about the fact that I know." She looked at him steadily. "And if you're going to fire me for finding it, can you do it before lunch? I have a good parking spot, and I'd like to keep the spot even if I lose the job." Cillian was quiet for another moment. Then he made a sound, short, low, involuntary, that it took her a second to identify as a laugh. Not a polished social laugh, a real one, the kind that had clearly surprised him as much as it surprised her. "You're not fired," he said. "I will handle Aurelius." What happened to the man who ran Aurelius' hospitality group was not something Maggie ever learned the details of. He stopped appearing in any public records she could locate within about 10 days. She did not dig further. The cannoli appeared on her desk the following Monday. They were from a bakery on Taylor Street. The real one, the old one, the kind with the hand-rolled shells. There was no note. There didn't need to be one. The thing growing in the space between them was neither of them's idea. That was the honest accounting of it. Cillian Voss had not intended to start noticing the specific sound of her laugh from down the hall, or the way she talked to the facility's staff, like they were people worth talking to, or the fact that she had quietly started leaving a second coffee on the corner of his desk. On the mornings she could tell were going to be bad ones, without him ever asking her to. Maggie had not intended to start knowing which version of his silence meant focused, and which meant furious, and which meant something was wrong that he wasn't going to discuss. She had not intended to feel the particular thing she felt when he said her name, which he said differently from the way he said everyone else's name, lower and less clipped, like he'd stopped being careful about it. She tried, reasonably, to talk herself out of it. She had a whole repertoire of reasons. He was her employer. He was 41 years old. He was, with reasonable certainty, responsible for at least several things she was better off not knowing about. She had seen the inside of a conversation she was never supposed to see. She knew what the men with logistics titles actually did. She was not naive enough, not anymore, to pretend she was working for a real estate developer, and still. The cannoli, the specific quality of his attention, which was absolute and unperforming, which she had never in her life received from anyone. The way he had said, 6 weeks in, entirely without context. The comment about your parking spot was funny, like he'd been turning it over and had finally decided to say so. She was, she knew, in significant trouble. The trouble arrived with considerably less metaphor on a Thursday in November. She'd been sent to the Meridian Club on Erie Street to walk the venue for a December event. Cillian was in back-to-back meetings. Rafferty was handling a contract issue. It was straightforward reconnaissance. Floor plan, lighting, acoustics, catering, kitchen access. She had her tablet, her tote bag that weighed approximately one small person, and a flat white from the coffee shop downstairs. She didn't notice the second car until it had been following her for 2 blocks. She noticed the men when they stepped out in front of her on a side street she'd cut down to avoid the lunch crowd. There were 3 of them. One of them smiled at her in a way that had no warmth in it whatsoever. "Maggie Tulloch," said the one who'd smiled. She held very still. "I think there's been a mistake." "No mistake." He stepped closer. He was wearing a jacket that didn't fit right across the shoulders, the way jackets didn't fit right when there was a shoulder holster underneath. "You work for Voss. We'd like you to deliver a message." "I'm an events coordinator," she said. Her voice came out steadier than she felt, which she filed away as an accomplishment. "I organize dinner seating. I can't deliver any message that's worth anything to anyone. You can tell him that DeMarco Holt is done waiting." "I can tell him." She stopped. Something happened in her, somewhere between her stomach and her chest. Something that was fear, but was also, unexpectedly, anger. She thought about the $60,000 spreadsheet. She thought about the way Cillian had looked at her, like she was the only honest thing in the room. She thought about the fact that she was standing on a sidewalk on Erie Street, being used as a prop in someone else's conflict, and she was genuinely, thoroughly tired of being treated like a prop. "I can tell him whatever you want," she said clearly. "But you should know that threatening the events coordinator is not going to get you the outcome you're looking for. I have no leverage. I have a cat and a parking spot and a color-coded spreadsheet system. If Cillian Voss cares what happens to me, which I am not confirming, then threatening me is the worst possible approach you could take, because he will not negotiate. He will just end you. I've seen how that works, indirectly." The 3 men looked at her. "So," she said, "do you want to deliver a message or do you want to rethink this?" The man who'd smiled was, very briefly, uncertain. She could see it. And in that uncertainty she moved. Not gracefully, because nothing Maggie Tulloch did was graceful. But with full commitment, stepping sideways past the nearest man, catching the edge of her tote bag on his arm, swinging the full weight of her overstuffed bag in a wide, uncontrolled arc that connected solidly with the side of his head and knocked him into the one behind him. She ran. She ran the way a 275-pound woman runs when adrenaline removes all the usual negotiations with her own body. Fast, loud, completely inelegant, and with total conviction. She made it to the corner of Erie before her phone was already ringing. "Rafferty," she answered at a dead run. "Mrs. Tulloch, your location, please." She gave it. "Stay on this line," Rafferty said, with the specific calm of a man for whom this was not the worst Thursday on record. "There is a car 45 seconds from your position." The black SUV pulled up in 38. Carver was driving. She got in the back seat, still breathing hard, clutching her tote bag, which had somehow survived the impact with the man's head better than the man's head had. "You hit someone with your bag," Carver observed. "It has a hardcover planner in it." She swallowed. "Is he okay?" A pause. "He has a headache. I'm sorry about the headache." Carver's eyes found hers in the rearview mirror. He was, she realized, doing something she had never once seen Carver do before. He was smiling. In the Wacker Drive office, 22 minutes later, Maggie had not fully stopped shaking, but was concealing it with what she considered a reasonable amount of success. Cillian was already standing when she came through the door. He crossed the room in 4 strides and put both hands on her face, careful, with a gentleness that was wildly mismatched with the rest of him. Checking the angle of her jaw, the line of her cheekbone, scanning her with the focused intensity of a man doing inventory on something that mattered. "Did they touch you?" he said. "Not a question, a deposition." "No. I hit one of them with my tote bag. There's a hardcover planner in there, so I think I'll need to send a card." Her voice wobbled slightly on the last word. "Cillian, it was DeMarco Holt." He said he was done waiting. The temperature in the room changed. "I know," Cillian said quietly. His hands were still on her face. He hadn't moved them. She wasn't asking him to. "I know about Holt. I should have moved faster on it." Something crossed his face that she'd never seen there before, a crack in the architecture, genuine and unguarded. "You were not supposed to be involved in this. I'm aware of that. You ran. I also hit a man with a planner. I'm having a complicated few hours." His mouth pressed together. The crack in his face widened fractionally. "You told them threatening you wouldn't work because I don't negotiate. Rafferty must have been listening to the call. I was improvising." "You were right." She looked at him. He was looking at her the way he had from the very beginning, like she was real, specifically, in a building full of performances. Like her realness was something he had no idea what to do with and had stopped trying to resist. "What happens to DeMarco Holt?" she asked. "Nothing you need to know about." Okay. She believed him. Not the way she would have believed a denial. She believed him the way you believe someone when you understand that protecting you is the actual reason they're not telling you. She had not been believed in very much in her life, and she had not expected, at 26, working an events job to cover rent, to find herself the thing that a dangerous man was choosing to protect. It was a lot to hold. She was holding it. "Maggie," Cillian said, her name the way he said it lower, less careful. "You're not going home tonight. Is that an order?" "It's a fact." He dropped his hands from her face, but he didn't step back. "Holt's people know where you live. Until this is resolved, you stay in the Hargrove suite. Carver will have your building access to collect what you need. Your cat will also be at the Hargrove." She stared at him. "You're relocating my cat. I'm relocating the things that matter to you." He said it simply, without decoration, as if it were operational information, and not the most unexpectedly tender sentence she had encountered in her adult life. She didn't say anything for a moment. She was doing the arithmetic of it. Who she was, where she'd come from, the used car she'd bought with tips, the student loans she was still paying down, the years of being the biggest person in the room in the way that made people look past her. And here was this man who could make other men disappear, who ran a criminal empire from a glass tower, doing the arithmetic of her cat. "Okay," she said quietly. What happened to DeMarco Holt happened over the course of 4 days and was not something Maggie witnessed. She stayed at the Hargrove. Her cat, an enormous tabby named Gerald II, named after no Gerald in particular, just the energy of the name, was delivered by Carver in a carrier with what appeared to be a new set of toys, which Maggie chose not to ask about. She worked from the hotel suite. She ate room service and read the Tribune and arranged seating charts, and tried not to think about the scope of what was happening outside the window. On the 4th evening, Cillian came to the suite himself. He knocked, which she noted. He came in and sat down and looked at her for a moment, and Gerald too immediately walked across the couch to step directly on his knee, which was an indignity that Cillian endured with what Maggie recognized as barely concealed tolerance and a great deal of not moving. "It's done," he said. She let out a long, slow breath. "Is everyone? The people who needed to be handled were handled." His voice was final about it, not cruel. Just the door closing on that room. "You're safe to go back, okay?" She looked at him. Gerald, too, had settled entirely on his knee and was producing a sound like a small engine. Cillian looked at the cat with the expression of a man who had absolutely not expected this specific outcome to his evening. "He likes you," Maggie said. "He's sitting on my suit. He does that to people he trusts. He once sat on my landlord's face, so suit is a step up." Cillian looked at Gerald too. Then he put one hand on the cat's back, a little awkwardly, the way someone who doesn't know cats pets cats. Gerald too leaned into it, and the engine sound doubled. "Maggie," Cillian said. "Yeah, I would like you to stay." She went very still. "In the suite, in my life." He said it the same way he said everything, directly, without excessive decoration, as if stating facts. But she could hear underneath it the specific effort of a man who had not said this kind of thing in a long time, possibly ever, to anyone. "You are the most disruptive thing that has ever happened to my calendar. You found a $100,000 fraud in a weekend because you can't help reading things. You argued with 3 armed men about leverage and event coordination. You relocated to a hotel room with your cat without once pretending any of this was normal." He paused. "I am not normal. This will not be a normal life. I spilled champagne on you the first time we met," she said. Normal was never the offer. Something in his face shifted into something she hadn't seen before, open, and a little unguarded, and real in the way she'd recognized from the first day she'd walked in. He leaned forward and kissed her, and it was nothing like the movies and everything like the truth. Careful and then not careful, one of her hands catching the lapel of his jacket, his hands finding her, the way hands find something they've been navigating around for months, and have finally stopped pretending they don't want to reach for. Gerald, too, displeased at the loss of the warm knee, stepped onto the coffee table and knocked over a glass of water. Maggie pulled back, looked at the water spreading across the table, looked at her cat, looked at Cillian, who was looking at the cat with an expression that lived very close to helpless. "He does that," she said. "Does he? He also knocks my coffee over in the morning." Cillian looked at her, the full weight of his attention, the thing that had no performance in it, that had no angle, that had always been directed at her like a spotlight she couldn't find a wall to put between herself and. "Then I'll make sure there's a second cup," he said. She went back to her apartment the next day. She also went back to Wacker Drive. She continued to go back to Wacker Drive every morning after that. The security detail that started appearing in an unremarkable car outside her building was subtle enough that she didn't mention it, which was her way of saying she was okay with it. Cillian's way of saying something he hadn't found the words for yet was the second coffee, already on her desk every morning before she arrived, from the right beans, the right grind, made exactly the way she drank it without once being asked. The men in the office stopped placing bets on when she'd quit. Carver started holding the elevator without being asked. Rafferty, who did not display emotions as a general policy, left a birthday card on her desk in April that was signed by 14 people, half of whom she was legally better off not knowing the full names of. She still dropped things. She still knocked over the occasional glass. She once walked directly into the edge of an open cabinet door and concussed herself mildly enough that it didn't require medical intervention, but sufficiently enough that Cillian sat next to her on the couch in his office for 2 hours to be certain, and didn't let go of her hand the entire time and told absolutely no one about it, and she didn't tell anyone either. Maggie Tulloch had come to Chicago with a second-hand car, a cat named after nobody, and the working theory that she would spend her life being the biggest, clumsiest, most easily overlooked person in any room she entered. She had been wrong about the overlooked part. It turned out that the right room, with the right person, overlooked nothing. It noticed everything. It remembered the parking spot comment 6 weeks later. It made sure there was a second cup. She had not been looking for a throne, but when the most dangerous man in Chicago offered her one, she found she had very little interest in turning it down.